Hi everyone, my name is Giana. Welcome back to my channel. I am a USA Today bestselling romance author, and today I'm going to talk to you about my writing process. Okay, so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about crafting characters. So I am known for some pretty eccentric and iconic characters. One of them is Daddy Zeus Garrow. Most of my readers call him Daddy Z or Daddy Zeus. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how I go about creating characters that really have a unique voice. And in my series, The Fallen Men, it's very obvious that each of them has a variation of biker slang. Each of them has a very unique personality. Now, I just released the 8th book in this series, so that's 8 unique heroes, in this case 7 unique heroes because one of the heroes repeats, that I need to make sure are not just unique in their own book, but unique throughout the series and in the tapestry of this motorcycle club that they all are a part of in this world. Basically, I want to talk from the very beginning. When I have an idea for a story, usually the idea is a concept like a hypothetical question such as, what would happen if, for example, let's use lessons in corruption, what would happen if a teacher fell in love with one of her students without even realizing that he was one of her students. So we start with the hypothetical. From there, I go directly to the characters. I am not worried about plot. I am not worried about any of that until I have a map of my characters, because if I don't know my characters, I can't tell the story. I always say that I am the conduit through which my characters speak and tell their story. I am a biographer and these characters are talking to me. So I need to listen to the characters first. That's step one. And basically I will go in and be like, okay, what are the names for my characters? For me, naming is a really important part of this process. I love names. I've had a names document that I have kept since I was something like 8 or 10 years old, where I have names that I like, their origins, their meaning. So I never unintentionally name a character. There's always something behind it, whether it's because the meaning is important to me, even if I only know that. For example, in Serpentine Valentine, which is my Medusa retelling, a lot of the characters in that book have names with meanings that are really important to the character. Now, I don't expect readers to look up what names mean, but I want there to be so much depth to my storytelling and to my character growth that it's that layered and it's that nuanced. So, for example, Alexandra Morgan, Alexandra means protector of mankind. And Lex, her nickname, she is the protector of womankind at Acheron University in Serpentine Valentine. The professor who assaults her is based on Poseidon, who is the god of the sea in Greek mythology. His name is Morgan, which means of the waves of the ocean. So there's these layers for me that are really important. And again, it doesn't necessarily matter. You don't have to be that intense and intentional about your naming. It can be more obvious. For example, King's name in Lessons in Corruption, his name is King, and he even says in the first chapter, or the second chapter, he says, you know, my name's King because I'm the heir to the throne, and my dad wanted me to live up to this name one day. So again, it doesn't have to be that intentional, but I think that it is something that like even lets you get in the right mindset with your characters. Sometimes I do have a character name just come to me and I just go with it, but usually it reveals itself to be intentional in the story. Like, oh, I didn't really realize why I named the character this until I started writing the story. And my brain, because I'm so interested in naming, already had made associations because of what I'd named the character. For example, there's a character, Eugene, who's a side character in The Fallen Men. Eugene is not a sexy hero name. He's just a side character right now too, but he's a sexy guy. And throughout the Fallen Men series, he takes a bigger role and he's actually quite instrumental in the goings on with the club. He's not a member, but he's closely associated with the club. So he doesn't have a biker name. His name is Eugene. And it seems like it doesn't fit. You're like, why is his name Eugene? Well, first of all, we don't get to choose our names. So he obviously had a parent who did not love him very much and gave him the name Eugene, a family name. But the whole process of kind of coming to terms with it is that somehow now Eugene suits him and that he became a man who had to develop around that name, which is not a great name. And so you know that that impacted his psyche. And so that's impacting his character as I'm writing his character throughout these books. So I think it starts with the name, long story short. And from there, I definitely think that it's important to have physical descriptors. And I don't just mean what color hair do they have? What color eyes do they have? I mean, you know, do they have any scars? Do they have any birthmarks? Do they have any tattoos? Do they have any physical features that are prominent or, you know, striking? Do they have any ailments? Do they have any, you know, anything that could like bring them stress or chronic pain? It's very important to know how your characters are in their bodies. And again, this is beyond appearance. This is also like how they feel in their bodies. You know, do you have a really skinny character who struggles with staying nourished, and it's because, you know, they have ADD and they forget to eat? Do you have a character with a limp because they were a soccer player and they were going to go pro and then they tore their ACL, and that limp is like a physical manifestation of the scar they have on their heart that they were not able to realize their dream? And I know that this all seems very meta, but I think it is important when you're world building because it really gets you into the heart of these characters. You don't need the reader to necessarily know all of this, but you need to know this to really develop a fully realized character. So it gets to the point where if you were to ask me, and people ask me all the time in Q&As on Instagram or Q&As on YouTube, if you look at my last video, the Fallen Men Q&A, people ask me, you know, like, what are Bia and Priest doing right now? What is Zeus doing right now? I can tell you without thinking what they are doing right this second, because I'm spending the time and the work on developing these characters so that they're actually friends of mine. I know their birthdays, I know their favorite color, I know their worst memories, I know everything about them. And again, not all of that information has to be written down. I don't need to write it all down to understand my characters, but it's something that I need to think about. I want to know everything about them, even if I'm not going to put it in the story. Especially if you're telling a series, which I can go into about what it's like to write a continuing series. Just let me know in the comments if that's something that you're interested in. But if you are, it's really important to know your characters from the very get-go. And that's the side characters who will have stories coming up, so that you can leave breadcrumbs, so that you can say, hey readers, I want you to see Eugene as a side character, for example, and I want you to love him through these books, or I want you to hate him through these books and then start to love him through these books so I can give him a redemption arc. So again, it's really important to know your characters, and not just the main characters, but the side characters if you're writing a series. And side characters, honestly, if they're important enough to be in the story, they should be important enough to interact in a meaningful way with your hero and heroine. So we talked about naming, we talked about appearance. Background is really important. I go into every book being like, okay, what's the parent dynamic? What's the family dynamic? Because, you know, nature versus nurture, sure, sometimes we are born with certain predilections, but at the end of the day, it's really how we're nurtured that shapes our personality. So for example, you know, I have a hero named Nova, and he comes from a very full, happy family. His parents are alive and well. He's got brothers that are lovely. His parents take in, you know, his best friend and little sister out of the goodness of their heart. They're very good people. So that's going to impact Nova in a certain way. But then on the other side, you have someone like Priest from Dead Man Walking, and his whole family died when he was young. And then he was basically abused and ridiculed in the town that he still lived in, and he was taken in by the church. So now has all of this trauma from his parents dying young, his little sister's dying young, and that's going to impact his personality. So you cannot tell a story, at least a good story, without understanding the family dynamic of your characters. Good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, even if they don't exist in the story, they exist in the hearts of your characters. So it's really important that you know what you're talking about with their family dynamics. And obviously friends are important too, and I will say, you know, whether they're a lone wolf or, you know, a social butterfly, it's important to know their friend dynamic. And I call this like knowing your character's role. So if you're going to have any kind of social dynamic in a book, you want to know how your character interacts with that social dynamic. And of course, you know, we don't want to judge a book by its cover. We don't want to put someone in a box, but actually we do, because human beings put people in boxes. So let's say we'll look at the Fallen Men again. So I have Zeus, and he's the president. He's the patriarch. He's the father figure. He's like the head honcho, not just of the club, but of the social dynamic. People go to him to ask questions, for advice, for protection, okay? Then we have Nova, who's the charmer. He's the Casanova, hence his nickname Nova. He is kind of the flirtatious, fun guy. Then we have King, who's a biker poet, and he's kind of someone that you would go to have an emotional chat, especially for these rough and tumble bikers who don't really necessarily know how to or want to talk about their emotions. King is the person that encourages them to have those conversations, and he's that safe place to go. So he's like the listener, the emotional touchstone. And then we have Boner, Aaron Clare, who was just in Asking for Trouble. He's the jokester of the group. Okay, so we have these different characters and how they interact with each other, and knowing their role in that social dynamic is also really important to knowing your character, right? So even for me and my friend group, I'm often the listener or the therapist. I love giving advice. I love listening. I love like being an emotional touchstone for my my friends. So that's how I interact with my friends, but that also says a lot about me as a character, as a personality. So that's also really important when crafting a character. Now, I think voice is very important, and I think this is something that authors sometimes, they kind of skip this step or they take shortcuts in this step. And I think it's really important to know the voice of your character, and that is, how do they speak? Would they really say this way? And obviously the Fallen Men is a really good example of character voice because they're all bikers and I write them having intense biker slang. So Zeus is probably known for having the biggest biker slang. He never says the G at the end of ing, you know, it's like freaking instead of freaking, or rollin' instead of rolling. Instead of, he says fulla, verve, for example. So there's all these shortcuts he takes with his language, and he swears a lot. I remember someone reached out to me and they were like, hey, I think that he says the words motherfucker like 60 times in the book. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense, because for Zeus, some people say some people say like as a verbal crutch, and for Zeus, it's fuck. So that's something I know about Zeus. That's something that really informs his characters, and that readers know when they read the book or when he comes up in different scenes. This is Zeus Garrow, and he swears a lot. He swears like a sailor, but he has a heart like a saint. So obviously that is a very significant example of voice, where obviously these bikers have this biker slang. But let's give a little bit more of a nuanced approach. So we have Cressida in Lessons in Corruption, who's King's heroine, and she was raised quite prim and proper in a upper middle class family that was quite reserved, and she is a literature student. She was a teacher, so her vocabulary is not only quite large, but she doesn't swear very much, and that's kind of something that King teases her about as a biker. He's like, you know, it's funny that she doesn't swear, so she'll say, instead of fucking, she'll say freaking, you know, instead of shit, she'll say crap. So that's an intentional decision to inform Cressida's character and tell you some things about her that I don't even have to convey in any other way. That she is prim, that she was raised a certain way, that she has some reservations, she's not totally uninhibited. So that tells you a lot about her character as we go throughout the book in ways the reader isn't even necessarily conscious of, but it's expressing her point of view. So that's a little bit more of a nuanced approach, versus you have someone like Harley Rose in Good Gone Bad, that same series. She is the son of Zeus. She was raised in a motorcycle club, so she has no compunction about swearing, about speaking her mind. So she's going to have quite a strong female voice. She's going to curse, yes, but she's also going to express her opinion much more boldly than Cressida will, who might prevaricate and kind of speak around what she wants or needs. She's going to be much more decisive with her language and much more ready to share her opinion. So again, that's character voice on a more nuanced level, but it's something that you need to think about. And I think sometimes, you know, maybe as a writer, you write a scene and you're like, this is so great, but you have to look back and think, is this really true to my characters? I really want them to banter, but are they bantering in the right way for who they are as individuals, as an example? So something to keep an eye on as you go through your books and writing. Am I really speaking properly to the voice of this specific character? And as we write more, we fall into certain traps within ourselves of like, I just like to write this way, or this is just, it's just so easy now and so fluid, but you're not necessarily making those intentional tweaks to language that are specific to your characters. Also, another one that's really great is, what's their nationality? Where are they from? I have a lot of characters who are diverse characters from different countries, different ethnicities. So, you know, I have Lila, who is the heroine in Inked in Lies, and she's Latina. So she, you know, Spanish influences some of her expressions, also her customs, her cultural habits. So, you know, she has tres leches cake for birthdays. She does that with her brother. When her brother passes away, she continues to do that. Her mom used to make her hot plantains as a comfort food, and so she has hot plantains as a comfort food. There's May, who is Chinese Canadian in Caution to the Wind, and her culture actually informs the entire book. So, you know, she has her grandfather Old Dragon, because their Chinese last name Lung means dragon, so they call him Old Dragon. She becomes part of the triad, and that's a whole cultural aspect around Chinese criminal culture that, you know, I had to learn about and imbue into the book. There's certain things, that meals that she eats, and certain things like she takes off her shoes whenever she enters someone's house, because it's just not done to keep your shoes on in someone's house. So there's these little ways that you want to inform your characters all the time, and the little decisions decisions that they make throughout the book to really build that authenticity of character. And especially if you're writing something that is other than you and your experience, you really need to make sure you do your research on that. And I've talked a lot about research. I love to research and I do a lot of research. So for example, for Axeman and May's book, where May is Chinese Canadian, I read autobiographies of Chinese American and Chinese Canadian people just to see what their upbringing was like, what different cultural norms they had, what kind of language they expressed, if there was any kind of interesting words from Mandarin or Cantonese, in May's case Cantonese, could I include into May's vocabulary. I just finished writing my Montlake duet, which is set in Italy, so I had to do a lot of research on Italian customs. She's there for the summer. Are there any festivals there that she would take a part of? The hero is Italian. What kind of things is he expecting? When does he eat his meals? In Italy, they eat later than they do in North America. Little things like that where you don't have to do that work, but when you do that work, it's so much more authentic and it creates this really rich tapestry of character and of landscape for people to escape into. And a lot of the time readers are looking for escapism, and that's what we want to give them. So those cultural, ethnic kind of subtexts are really important as well. I think you have to do your research, you have to talk to people who have lived experience and make sure that you're really developing them as like a fully realized character and not as stereotypes. And that's something I love to do. I think it's so important and I will do for the rest of my life. Anyway, okay, so we've kind of built our characters as individuals. We know their background, we know, like, we can talk about their job. What is their job? Why do they have that job? Is it something that they love? Are they passionate about? They always wanted to do it? Or did they fall into it and they don't really love it? I have characters who have both. They have a practical job, but they have a passion on the side, or they're pursuing their passion no matter what. Giselle in the Evolution of Sin series wants to be an artist, which is incredibly difficult. And so we go through, you know, what it's like for her to be a struggling artist through to having her first successful show in New York. And what's the evolution of her character through the lens of realizing her dream. Or we can look at Cressida in Lessons in Corruption, who is a teacher just because her parents told her to be a teacher, and a wife. Very traditional, not very ambitious, and she's not very happy with her job as a teacher. She wants to do something that is more meaningful to her, and how that kind of box that she's been put in interacts with her character and how it makes her interact with King. So once you have those two characters really fully realized, you need to think about how they mesh. So what's her character motivation? What's his character motivation? And how are those motivations going to interact? Are they going to intersect easily, or are they going to butt heads? And that's really important too, because if we don't know character motivations, we can't know how characters are properly going to connect or miscommunicate or be ships passing in the night. So we're building out these two main characters so that we can also see how authentically that they're going to react when we put them in a scenario together. So basically that background, like from the family dynamics, like have made him a black sheep. He's a loner, but she was raised with a big family and she was very social and popular. These two characters meet. They should not have an easy time of it at first. The black sheep and the popular girl probably are going to have some friction. And that's how you stay true to your characters as well. You've developed them all the way through to the roots. How are they going to tango throughout the book? So that's really important. And I think that even for people who are writing like fluffy rom-coms or to the darkest of books and the villain is going to fall in love with the girl, whatever, you need to make sure that there's an evolution throughout the character growth together as well as individuals. You know, as we get older, we evolve as individuals, but we also hopefully in our healthy relationships evolve with our partners, with our friends, with our family. So you want to show that interplay as well. It's fine if, you know, the black sheep and the popular girl have friction at first, but how are each of them going to work to come together? Is the black sheep going to make more of an effort to go to her parties, to seek her out in social situations? Is she going to be okay missing a blowout bash to maybe do something with him at the library? So that's really important because the characters are impacting the relationship. And if you aren't doing that from an individual meeting together in the middle, then you're probably going to have a bit of a run-of-the-mill relationship that's a little bit stereotypical, falls a little bit flat. So some examples of how I think individual character can really be expressed throughout a couple's relationship is Asking for Trouble was just my latest release. Aaron Clare is a neon artist, so he makes neon signs, and this is his form of self-expression. Blue, his heroine, it's a forbidden love, so he cannot, for whatever reason, kind of express his love for her and admiration for her publicly, easily, and often. And so he finds a way that's true to him. He wouldn't write love notes or poetry like King writes love notes to Cressida in Lessons in Corruption, or like Zeus writes letters to Lulu in Welcome to the Dark Side. His form of expression would be through neon signs. So he leaves neon signs that he custom creates for her in spots around town that he knows that she goes. So in her cosmetology studio, he leaves, a neon light for her. In the place where she goes for coffee, a blue sign that says baby, 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 because he calls her blue baby. So these are the ways that you can really create unique romances without even having to try that hard, because my character of Aaron / Boner is informing that decision for me right from the get-go because of how I developed his character, right? He's fine with expressing himself. He lost his parents from a young age, and his sister was taken from him when he was a little bit older, so he's been alone for a long time. But he was adopted by the Fallen Men family, and he's very secure in himself and in that life and family that he's created for himself. So he's coming from a place of being fine to express himself and express his love for a woman. Blue is coming from a place of abuse and neglect for her whole life, particularly from male relationships. So she's wary, she needs to be courted and soothed like a startled horse. And here's Aaron, more than willing and able to do that because of his background and his upbringing and his place in life. So I hope this was kind of helpful to show you how you can really layer your character growth from all the way from the inception of the seed of a name and what that means and how that interacts with the story, all the way to the background, to the social dynamics that they have, to their cultural identity, to their hopes and dreams. You really need to have all of those aspects tied neatly with a bow before you start writing your story, because they're going to inform where your story needs to go in a very authentic way. And I think it will also help a lot if you ever struggle with writer's block. Go back to your characters, sit with them a while, think about what they would do if they were stressed, if they were under pressure, if they had fallen in love against all the odds. Sit with them and take a step back from the story. And I think that you'll find you'll have a much easier time with moving forward in the story, because now you'll have your characters talking to you, telling you how you should proceed. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. I love talking about character and I could do it all day long. So let me know your questions. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, and I will be back next week with more.